Okay, so at this point, the iPhone 13 is more than a year old, and I've actually been using one for well over a month as my daily driver. And overall, my experience has been, well, exactly like what I was expecting. And that's because the last phone I was using was the iPhone 14. And since I knew about the minor differences between the two phones, I knew what to expect, and I was right. But the funny thing about this phone is that switching from the 14 to the 13 is technically considered a downgrade, right? But in this case, it really shouldn't and does not feel like one at all, because all the features are exactly the same as a 14, yet you pay like 10% less money. And cherry on top, all the features this phone is missing aren't even that important for the average user, because they're such small and minor upgrades that for most, they'll go unnoticed. It's little things like the iPhone 14 has an extra GPU core, which apparently makes it 18% faster just for some very specific tasks that really need that extra GPU power. And in most cases, that's going to be during gaming or maybe while exporting videos, for example. So if you get the 14 instead of the 13, in theory, you'll be able to export videos and play games like 18% faster. So cool, I guess. But it's not that the 13 is bad at doing any of that stuff. It's just that the 14 is, well, 18% better. Otherwise, both phones still have the same A15 Bionic processor, and as far as I could tell, both have literally the same performance for everyday tasks. The 14 does have 6 gigs of RAM instead of the 4 gigs on the 13, but to be fair, even 4 gigs is enough for an iPhone. And although I don't have the 14 anymore for a side-by-side comparison, I can confirm that this phone does not feel slow or laggy if that's something you were concerned about. In fact, it feels very smooth and responsive despite not having a 120Hz screen. But the 14 also didn't have that, so it doesn't make this phone worse in any way. It's just as good. The screen gets nice and bright, it's color accurate, meaning you can trust it for color correcting photos or videos, and it's also very sharp, even though it's basically just a 1080p panel. But because this is an OLED screen, you know you're getting the brightest whites and especially those deep blacks, which by the way make this phone HDR certified. Now, arguably, one of the biggest improvements in the iPhone 14 is related to repairability. It has a removable back glass, which means if you break it, it costs less to get it fixed straight from Apple. Now, this also goes hand in hand with durability. And as far as that's concerned, both phones are equally durable. Both are IP68 water resistant. Both are using the same aluminum frame, the same ceramic shield glass on the front, and the same glass on the back, which sadly has a glossy finish. I really don't like this, and I'd much rather use a case like most people. Something like this, or even this new Casetify bounce case, which actually solves both problems because it hides the fingerprints you get with a glossy finish, and it obviously also protects your phone and lowers the chances of it getting cracked, especially the bounce case, because this thing is rated for like 21 feet of drop protection, which needless to say is way more than enough for really anyone, even a giraffe. Seriously, yet it doesn't make the phone feel like a total brick in your hands. And this is possible because of these corners, which are actually inspired by Air Max sneakers. So they turn most drops into a simple bounce, hence the name bounce case. But I think what Casetify is really known for is, without a doubt, customization. They have thousands of designs to choose from on their website. You can pretty much customize your phone however you'd like. They also have a plethora of useful accessories. But if you just adore one of the cases I have here, just use the link in the description and it will take you straight to some of my favorite designs, including these. I must say though, I was surprised to see how all of them are also surprisingly built from other recycled cases. So they're just better for our environment. Check out the link below. I promise you, you won't regret it. And thanks to Casetify for sponsoring this video. Next is battery life. Okay, so this is one of those things that I feel like most people care the most about, because here's the thing. You might not care about the screen, you might not care about the cameras, you might not care about the build quality, but you definitely want your phone to last longer, right? Yes, that's right. Well, I'm happy to tell you that the iPhone 13 is one of those phones that I can comfortably recommend because it has such a good battery life. Over the past month or so of me using this phone, it rarely went below 20%. On normal days, I can consistently get like 4+ hours of screen on time with like 40 to 50% battery remaining by the end of each day. And with a lot of usage, like 6 to 7 hours of screen on time, I'll still have more than 20 to 30% battery remaining. Now, obviously, these numbers may be different for you depending on how you use your phone. But the point is, the battery life is so good that regardless of how you use your phone or what you do on it, I'm confident that you won't be disappointed. However, technically the iPhone 14 does have a larger battery with a total of 3,279 milliamp hours compared to the iPhone 13 with 3,227 milliamp hours. But that's just a 1.6% increase in capacity, which in real life doesn't really mean anything. So I'm just gonna say that both phones have the same battery life, which is true, at least based on my experience. Okay, last but not least, the cameras. So although both phones have the same standard wide-angle camera and an ultra-wide-angle camera on the back, both 12 megapixels, the difference is that the 14 has a newer, slightly larger main camera sensor with bigger pixels and a wider aperture, which is a good thing for sure, but it doesn't make it miles better than the 13. If anything, it's a very small improvement for low-light shots as it captures a little more detail and also gets some help from the new photonic engine running in the background. Otherwise, as you can see for yourself, the iPhone 13 also takes great shots in low light. It has night mode and it works very well. But pretty much like any other camera, the more light you have, the better the results will be. So photos that are shot in a bright environment look nice and sharp with a good amount of detail and contrast. The exposure is mostly accurate, the colors look natural, and the dynamic range is, well, pretty good. The results are also consistent with barely any shutter lag. And just like the 14, the iPhone 13 also has photo styles. Now, even though I barely find myself using them, they are nice and can be useful sometimes. And my favorite one is the one called Warm. Besides that, the ultra-wide-angle camera is not as sharp as the main camera. But that's not to say it's bad. It's exactly the same one you will find in the iPhone 14, and it's one of the best out there. It's just not meant for taking the most detailed photos. It's really for that ultra-wide 120 degrees of field of view, and it does that almost perfectly. Flipping over to the other side, the selfie camera also takes great shots, except it doesn't have autofocus like the iPhone 14's selfie camera. And this may sound like a deal breaker, but believe me, it's not. In fact, if I didn't tell you, you'd probably never know because the photos are great. And fun fact, every iPhone and even most Android phones that came out before the iPhone 14 didn't have autofocus in the selfie camera, but their photos were just fine for their time. So trust me, it's not a problem. Now, when it comes to video, the iPhone 13 can do everything the 14 can and do it just as well, except being able to shoot in 4K in cinematic mode. So while this phone has cinematic mode and it seems to be just as good as the 14, it's just locked at 1080p at 30 frames per second. Now quickly, just FYI, the iPhone 14 also got two new safety features, crash detection and emergency SOS via satellite. And I also said this in my iPhone 14 review video that these features are nice to have, but I personally don't feel like I need them because I don't live in a remote area and I'm not going hiking every other day. But of course, if you are, then sure, you might want to consider getting the iPhone 14 if you think it can actually save your life one day. But if that's not the case, I seriously don't think anyone should be buying the iPhone 14 right now. I think the 13 is the way to go. You may argue that the iPhone 14 will get another year of software updates, which is a valid point, but right now it's so far ahead in the future that it's kind of out of the question because most people use the same phone for only 2 to 3 years, and this phone still has at least 3 to 4 years of software updates left. So I would say get the 13, save yourself some money, and thank me later. But that's all for now. If you found the video helpful, consider subscribing, follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you later.